Joe. All right, so Chapter 5 was really our first introduction to revenue. That's really the goal behind Chapter 5, is to get us into the revenue mode of thinking. Now, if you've dealt with revenue, that's one half of the whole profit equation. The other side of the profit equation then is cost. All right? So really what we're going to start talking about here in Chapter 6 are production and cost, because that's the other side of the profit equation. Right? One of them is revenue. How much money do we make? Or how much money do we earn, not make? And then how much do we have to spend in order to make that much money? And hopefully, of course, the goal of all of this is to make more than you spend. Okay, it was an interesting story for a project that one of the other guys that teaches here worked on with me. He showed me a business plan that one of his sort of cohorts came up to him with and said, here's my business. And he came up with this whole business plan, and he said, is there a way that I can make money? And basically the teacher here looked at his demand and his supply schedules and his cost and his revenue possibilities and said, basically on analysis, saying, no, there's absolutely no way that you can earn a profit. And the guy said, okay, well, can you minimize my loss? And and the teacher's response was, yes, fire everyone. And he's like, no, you don't understand. I have to keep everyone hired, but I need to lose the least amount of money as possible with all of those people hired. And my friend was looking at him going, there's no way to minimize it when you've got all these people hired because there's so many of them who apparently are doing nothing. He's like, yes, I know, but they're all in my family. So this guy, who is a relatively wealthy businessman in his area where he was living, it's in northern Illinois, but he started this company with one reason, and that was to hire his immediate family members who couldn't keep a job anywhere else. So he was literally running this company and he's like, look, I'm going to make a loss. I've accepted I've made a loss, but how could I minimize the loss? And so so they did a little bit of a mini analysis and figured out who they should keep working and who they should just have working but not actually make them do anything. And that's essentially what they winded up doing, is pointing out that sometimes having people do nothing is better than having them do anything at all. Because exactly, they would make more mistakes and cost them more money in mistakes than they would earn in the sales of the things that they actually made. Relatively interesting analysis. And again, the guy was like, look, I know I'm going to lose money. I've accepted I'm going to lose money. I'm going to keep this business open because it keeps them out of my house. Because if they didn't, because he was the rich family member that everyone went to for money. And at least him for more money, because he'd say, well, you got a job, now you can spend whatever you make, right? So live on whatever it is that you quote unquote earn. And it was better for him to hire them at, whatever it was, like $18 an hour for, a 40-hour week, and have them do nothing than it was to have them knock on his door constantly saying, I need another $1,000. I need rent for next month. Right? At least this way they had to actually budget to some degree. So interesting little story. Please, if you ever get yourself into that situation, come find me. I'm hireable. I'm willing to do nothing and get paid for it. Okay, well, I don't expect you to. So, all right, so what we have to deal with now are, we'll start a little bit with cost, just because I want to do some classification and do some terminology, but really I want to talk about production before I start talking about cost, all right? But I'm going to set some terms just so that we have to deal with when you are dealing with the costs of production, you have two types of costs. You have explicit costs and you have implicit costs. Again, this is a very economics standpoint. If you get into an accounting class, you won't talk about these things. All right, this is strictly for economics. So bear with me to some degree. All right, explicit cost. These are all the things that you buy or you spend money on. I mean, it's money going out. Those are explicit costs, okay? They're exactly what you'd think costs are in general. It's stuff that you spend on, whether it's raw materials, whether it's insurance, whether it's utilities, whether it's, taxes, whether it's labor paying wages, all those terrible things. Those are explicit costs. Implicit costs are, when you think of implicit costs, think of this. Think of opportunity cost. In other words, you decide to run a business. You are running this business and in hopes of earning money, right, of making a profit and being able to take some of that profit home, in theory, right? Unless you're independently wealthy and you're just trying to let your family suck off the backside of yourself, all right? Opportunity cost. If you are not running a business, what would you probably do? You would go get a job, right? And if you got that job, they would pay you to do it, right? So the idea is that when you run your own company, the implicit costs are the money that you could have earned if you just worked for the man instead. So this is money potentially earned if you got a job. And then obviously that number is different from person to person based on their education and experience and all those other sorts of things. But when you start to run your own company, right, because the idea here is that all of you at some stage are going to start your own company or take care of one, whatever. The fact remains is that when you go to figure out how profitable you really are, you're mostly going to look at these things, the hard numbers, right? We made $1 million, we spent $800,000, there was $200,000 of profit. But if you could have gotten a job at Wall Street paying you $250,000 a year instead, why'd you bother running your own company? Right? I mean, if you can get a job that pays you $250,000 and you only earn $200,000, your business is not truly economically profitable, right? And that's what oftentimes people who are running their own business tend to miss. They look at the business and they say, oh, yay, my business had $40,000 of profit. Woohoo! It's like, well, if you could have gotten a job that paid more than $40,000, your business didn't do so good, right? So what that leads us to is a profit analysis along the same lines. Right? There are two types of profit. Can't spell the word accounting. There's two C's in it. Accounting profit is the profit that you think it is. It's revenue minus cost. It's total revenue minus explicit costs. So it's the amount of money that you came in, subtract the amount of money that went out. That's accounting profit. Economic profit, on the other hand, is all about opportunity costs. So we need to include our opportunity cost. So to determine if we're making an economic profit, we do the same thing. We just include our implicit costs as well. Okay? So in that example where if you run your own business and you make $200,000, so $1 million minus $800,000 gives you $200,000. If you could have had a job that paid you $250,000, 1 million minus 800,000 minus 250,000, really your economic profit was negative $50,000 because you pissed away 50 grand to run your own business. Of course, at the same time though, if running this business, you got to hire, 2 or 3 of your family members, might that be worth $50,000 a year to you? If it keeps them out of the back bedroom, hell yeah. I mean, those are the sorts of things that you have to weigh when you start talking about implicit costs and opportunity costs. But at the same time, if all we care about, again, remember, money, all we care about is having the most money at the end of the year, If that's all we care about, then those implicit costs make a difference, and we shouldn't have started our own business. We should have just gone and made $250,000 a year and screw running our own business. All right? So, since we are in an economics class and not an accounting class, guess which one of these profit ones you should probably focus on. Okay, so from now on, when I talk about profit, please realize I will always be talking about economic profit. So when I tell you that a company is not profitable, I'm not saying that it's losing money. All I'm saying is that it's not making more than the opportunity cost of running it. Okay? That's it. So you could still have a company that's making thousands of dollars of profit, accounting profit, but it may not be making economic profit. Okay? All right. So this is just sort of setting the table, setting some terminology, and trying to point out, I will try and point this out as often as I can throughout this class, that I mean economic profit, and that this includes these implicit costs that they may be kind of nebulous, right? They're numbers that can change, right? Because right now for you guys, your implicit costs, the job you may be able to go out and get right now, only earns you $30,000 or $40,000 a year. But once you finish your education, you get a couple years of experience, and maybe you even get another degree on top of this. Now your implicit costs, what you could get a job for, is now maybe up there at $50,000 or $60,000. And again, your implicit costs they're going up, right? So running your business has to make you that much more money to be, quote unquote, economically profitable, right? And if a company is breaking even in an economic sense, basically what that means is that the amount of profit you're earning is the same as you would have made if you would have just gone out and gotten a job, okay? Now, again, there's lots of hidden stuff in there that we could spend lots of time arguing about and having fun discussions on, but we don't have the time for that kind of stuff. But I do want you to know what these things mean and how to handle them. All right. So, we're good with this? Okay. So, let's go back then to production. I have a little story I like to relate to explain production to you. So it was about 5 or 10 years ago. I was spending the summer in Indiana with my brother, and it was just one of those for fun summers. And what we decided that summer was that we were going to start doing some charity work, and he wanted to know what kind of charity work we wanted to do. And so the two of us sat down, we had a little discussion, and we were like, well, we should do something for our church, right? So we were, we loved the church that we went to. It was a great church. All the community that was surrounded in it made us all happy. So we were like, great, yeah, let's try and do something for the church. So we went in, talked to the pastor, and the pastor said, you guys should start a charity car wash. The church needed to have the roof fixed. It was like a $10,000, repair that they needed to have put in to have a roof so that you didn't have to put buckets underneath it every time it rained. And you guys have been to churches like that, right? Where anytime it rains, you dodge as you walk, right? Ours was similar. So we said, okay, let's do that. So what we did is we said, okay, me being the nerd economist that I was at the time, I was, working on my economics degree, so I was, looking at it from this perspective. And I said, okay, when I start the first week that we ran this car wash, it was supposed to be my brother and I working together. Of course, what happens on the weekend of the car wash? He's sick, of course. He's got 3 kids, I don't have any, so of course he gets sick all the time, and I stay away all the time, so I don't. So the first weekend we ran this car wash, it was just me. Now, the nice part about running this car wash is that we had a mechanic shop. There was a buddy of both of ours that owned a shop downtown in Valparaiso, Indiana, which is where we grew up. And he agreed to let us borrow his driveway, basically, right? So he had a big, huge mechanic shop, and he had a little side parking lot that had water access, and he's like, here, I even have soap. You can use my soap. So I had no cost going into this car wash, right? None whatsoever. I made a couple of little posters on my own, put them out in front of the car wash in the grass, and said, car wash for charity, Emmanuel Lutheran Church, yay, And I tried to sell a little bit, so at the very beginning, I took my shirt off, and I had my skimpy short shorts on, and I walked around, and I was like, hey, get a car wash. What, you don't think I could do it? Okay, it was a few years ago, so I actually did used to look okay once. Anyways, it was just me. I was the only one working, and I washed a whole whopping 10 cars for, like a 5 or 6 hour shift, like literally 1 an hour. That was about the best I could do. I didn't shave or anything, so, I didn't have the appropriate accoutrement on, apparently. The nice thing about it, though, is that, I was asking for charity, so I said, like $10 a car wash, and this is strictly for charity, and so, how much money did I make? 10 car washes, $10 a car wash, I made $100. So after my Saturday car washing experience, we went to church on Sunday the next day, and the pastor came up and he said, well, Marshall, Marston, how'd you guys do over the weekend? And I was like, whoa, and I gave him the $100 in cash, and the pastor looked at it, what did he do? No way, somebody just gave him a free $100. He's like, kick ass! Wow, that was awesome. That was so great. You guys did awesome. I said, yeah, I did great. My brother was kind of like, and the pastor's looking at us like, what, you mean come on, Marston. And he's like, well, my kids, blah, blah, excuses. Anyways, so the pastor's like, well, you guys, come on, next week, no sick kids. And even if there are sick kids, I mean, come on, you're married, Marston. Your wife can take care of it. He's like, blah, 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 excuses, whatever. Anyways, next week, got it. It was he and I. We both had to work. All right, again, got the same car wash deal, had the same signs out this time, but now there were 2 of us, right? So, we were still both young guys, right? And we were lifting, so, strapping. I had shorter hair then, though. And I didn't have any of this stuff. Anyways, again, walking around, and when we both started, we were both, he was on one street, I was on the other street, and we were both, car wash, come get car wash. Attractive young guy, will press chest against window, Doesn't that work? Oh, you wouldn't appreciate that? Okay, good non-answer. Anyways, the fact remained is that now, not only when we did get a car to show up, we could get it done much faster. We had 2 people advertising, 2 signs. We got more business, right? And when it came time to wash the car, I mean, it was a well-oiled machine, right? My brother's like, I got the right side, I got the left side. We didn't talk while we were washing. We just wash. And then we were done. We send them on their way because then we need to go out and advertise again, right? So it was a pretty good deal. We washed 24 cars in our 6 or 7 or 8 hour span, however long it was, right? It kind of depended on how nice the day was, but, So we showed up the next day at the church and gave the pastor $240, and what did he do? You bet he was happy. He almost fainted. He's like, wow, holy crap, can't you get more people to help, right? Because more people would make it better, right? And we're like, well, sure it would. And he's like, well, come on, Marshall, get your wife to join, right? You guys don't have any kids. You don't need to do anything over those weekends. You should really be trying to get her in on this stuff and tell her that it's really going to help towards getting the church fixed and the leak stopped and yada, 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 and praise God and holy Jesus and all those other great things that come along with religion, right? So, sure enough, next week, and honestly, I told my wife that she should join me. She kind of went and looked at me and went, and then I had the pastor call her, and then she was in. I'm not an idiot, right? So anyways, we got my wife in there. And so what do you do when you've now got some mixed gender going on? Now we had a better plan, right? We still put up the signs. We still had someone advertising. But it wasn't me. It wasn't my brother. I threw my wife in a bikini and sent her walking up and down the street. Somehow things worked out tons better that way. I don't know why. I mean, if you compared our butts, they were almost the same at that time. I mean, now they're not, but you don't believe me? I'm going to bring pictures next week. Okay. Anyways, the fact remains is that we still wash 36 cars, right? And of course, once you get your wife out there and she's working with you, what are you doing as she's walking around in her string bikini and, and flashing the sign? I mean, what am I doing? I'm wolf whistling nonstop. I'm spraying the hose at her. I'm trying to get her wet, whatever. Anyways, we enjoyed ourselves. Again, though, come Sunday, go to the church. What do? Hand him $360, and what does the pastor say? Okay, Marcia, your wife worked. Marston, you've got parents. They live in town. The kids could be with them. And Marston's like, really good point. Sounds great. So what happened next week? Pastor called his wife. And she was in, of course, right? I mean, you don't say no to the pastor, right? I mean, he's like, Holy Mary, Mother of God, Jesus is here to save you type thing. And his wife was like, oh, yeah, okay, whatever. So she was in. So rinse and repeat. Now you've got 2 people advertising. Now you've got 2 people working. And on top of it, when the advertising and if the cars lined up a whole lot, they could come in, step in, and maybe help out a little bit more. And if it was really slow and the advertising was off for a little while, maybe they could all just have fun just cleaning one car. It was more fun, right? It's much more fun. And we still washed more cars. We washed 46 cars that last day. All right, so again, Sunday, come in, give the pastor $460. At this stage, the guy is going crazy, right? I mean, how much money have we given him so far? I mean, add up all of those and multiply by 10. I mean, that's a non-insubstantial amount of money, right? I mean, the pastor's looking at this going, 10 grand to fix this? How much do we have so far? We're a good, 2/10 of the way there, right? Almost $2,000 sitting in his pocket. He's like, wow, you need more people. So what does a pastor do at this stage, since he can't, obviously guilt anyone of our family into doing it? He asks the church, exactly. You put an ad in the bulletin saying, car wash being run by Munt family. Join them, help out, repair the church, roof a year earlier, or whatever he was saying, and the Holy Mary, Mother of God, Jesus is going to come save you type thing on top of it, right? Because it's religion, so it's great. So we got a new friend to help us on the 5th week. He's an 88-year-old member of the church. Wonderfully nice old man. Great guy. Absolutely a hoot. But he's 88. Well, we made him keep everything on. We were a little nervous about that. So we just, George, great guy. Again, George, wonderful guy. Loved him. Great hanging around the kids at the church, whatever. Tells great stories, too. So we're like, okay, George, can you help wash? And he's like, oh, yeah, sure I can. Just let me get there. I'll be there any minute now. I mean, George has had back problems. He's had knee surgery. He's broken a hip. He's 88, right? I mean, it's happened to everybody. So we're like, okay, tell you what, George, why don't you just take the money, okay? Right? He's like, oh, yeah, I'm good with money. So first person comes along, and, after we get the whole spiel going again, right, the wives are out advertising, we're getting the soap ready, getting the washing ready, and we get the first car, we're going, and the first car comes through, and we get it done, and there's another car right behind him, and so we assume George is going to take care of the money, and apparently George has collected some money, but the car hasn't left, it's still sitting there, so we're washing, and the other car is like, waiting, still sitting there, and we're washing, and it's kind of like, hey, George, what's going on? He's like, oh. I'm like, well, did he pay? He's like, well, what's wrong? Why isn't he leaving? Beats me. Well, go ask him. He's like, all right. Gets to the car. Gets back, sits down. The car's still sitting there. We're still washing. We're done with that car. And I'm like, George, what's up? And he's like, oh, he said he needed change. I said, well, did you give him change? Nope. Well, why not? Don't know how much he needs. It was $10, George. What do you do? I don't remember. I had to go ask the guy in the car. He's like, I gave him a 20. And I'm like, okay, so, no, I just told him I gave him a 20. And then he left. He's like, yeah. Okay. So I went back to the cash box and got a 10 and walked back and gave him the 10. And the guy drove along. And I'm like, George, you want to make change for 20? He's like, whoa, I can do that. I'm like, George, if I gave you $20 and it cost $10, how much change would you get? Well, it'd be $10, George. He's like, okay. So that went on more often than I care to admit. Anyways, we didn't have a really good week. That's a 45. George, as it turned out, was not exactly an overly nice man. I mean, he's nice in the church, and apparently in the morning he has his medication going, and he didn't take his medication on the day that he was there. So he was in pain, and I understand pain. So if it hurts every time you move any piece of your body, that kind of sucks. So he was not exactly very nice to people, nor was he very good at doing math. It was a long day. Anyways, after that particular event, we came in, we donated the $450 to our church and told the pastor that we were done and we retired. The George experiment did not work.
Well, you have to be running out of cars at this point.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, eventually they've been washed. But yeah, it rains again, right? So they get dirty again. I mean, so that was the idea anyway. So my question to you is, if I were running a business to wash cars, who would I hire and who would I fire, right? So this was me. This is my brother. This is my wife. This is my brother's wife. And this is the infamous George.
Just keep the wives. You just get in the back and get rid of George.
So keep the wives, dump George. Why? Bring more business. Now, why am I keeping all of my family in this particular deal? How much did we have to pay each one of us here? Nothing, right? So as long as that person added to output, you want more of them, right? As long as they were adding to output, they were adding to total revenue because they were zero minus in the cost side. That's the way charity works, right? You keep bringing more people into a charity event until you get to that point where the person bringing in actually subtracts from output, okay? And honestly, charity organizations do the same analysis. They keep bringing in more people into the charitable organization things until they reach maximum capacity where one more person, instead of making things go up, makes it go down. That's the cutoff point. The only reason they do that, though, is because, of course, they don't have to pay anybody. That's charity, though. What happens if we were actually paying these people? So let's suppose that after this little experiment, I decide I'm going to start my own car wash industry. And I'm going to say, okay, again, I'm charging $10 per car wash. If I were going to pay people, say, what do you think, $50 a day, $60 a day? How many of these people do I hire? How do you start figuring that out? The way you do it is not by looking at totals, okay? One of the most deceiving things about dealing with production is that you almost always get things as a total. Because that's what you can measure, right? At the end of the day, you can say, we had 4 people, we washed 46 cars. But what you really want to know is something that's slightly different. What you really want to know is the marginal product or the marginal output. Marginal product. Think of it as marginal output. And marginal, if you'll remember back, did we ever talk about marginal? Okay. So marginal, the idea behind marginal is how much does one more unit of input lead into output? All right? So that's its definition. How much increase in output or product results from one more increase of input. It's a very businessy way of saying how much does output grow because I hired one more person. That is actually how much a person adds to the output. So, let's calculate the marginal product of all of our workers. So, prior to me getting hired, how many cars were being washed every week? None. So, after I started washing cars, how many cars got washed? How many cars did I add to output? 10. Because we went from 0 up to 10. That's an increase of 10. Now, when my brother joined me, I was making 10 by myself. With my brother, we made 14. How much did my brother increase output? 14. Literally 14, right? Because he increased it from 10 to 14, right? And the idea behind it was that once he got into the mix of things, we started creating an assembly line, right? Instead of me having to do all of the work, now we started subdividing it up into other sections, right? So maybe my brother, being a little bit younger, was probably better at advertising. He did more of the running around and jumping. I did more of the washing and taking of money, right? That's part of the older brother's responsibility, right? To be the responsible one. Anyways, so the fact remains, though, is that he added to the overall output. Now, how much did my brother's wife add? Well, sorry, my wife. 12. Now, it's not that I lost. It's that I didn't gain as much, right? This is known as the law of diminishing returns. At some point in time, as you are hiring people, right, there's a certain amount of optimization that occurs when you're hiring people, right? For a car wash, apparently it's 2. Once you get that third person in there, now my growth starts to decrease. Please note that my output is still growing, right? Law of diminishing returns, its definition is when the growth in output starts to fall. So it's not when output falls, but when the growth in output falls. The book will say, or when marginal product decreases. That's the same thing. This is the economic-y way of putting it, is when the marginal product falls. A more Englishy way of putting it is to say when your growth isn't as much as it was the prior time. So basically, my wife, she added 12 units of output, but that wasn't as much as the person before her added, and therefore that's where the law of diminishing returns kicked in. So, how much marginal product did my brother's wife add? Because my brother's wife increased it from 36 to 46. And how much did George increase in output? Yeah. this is the number that you would put in red and immediately say, okay, that person, yeah, bye-bye. Even if you're free, we don't want you. Not to be mean, but from a business perspective, remember, and what the pastor would probably even tell me, he's like, oh, Marshall, I'm sorry, when I gave him the money. Of course, I prefaced it with, this is the end, so he didn't need to try and sell it anymore, but he did feel a little bad in getting me a piece of assistance. And I did not assist. And plus, it's a great story. Okay, so what this points out is, one, the law of diminishing returns, and two, the first analysis of marginal product calculations. Marginals we use all the time, okay? Basically, it's a way of saying, how does one more of something change the expectation that we have? It's a way of basically saying that my brother produced 14 cars in the car wash. If he worked alone, do you think he would have washed 14 cars? Nope. He probably would have been pretty close to me. He probably washed around 10. But because he was with me, the two of us together were able to streamline the output, and that's why our growth was more than just essentially the two of us working separately. Okay? This is exactly why, Harry Ford came up with the assembly line process for building cars or guns or anything that we were trying to produce. Because at some stage, right, as long as you can take your product and break it up into parts that just need to put together, you can keep keep saying, here's another part, just put this together. As it comes to you down the assembly line, grab it, screw it together. Grab it, screw it together, right? That's why you keep seeing growth in your marginal output. Once you get past that stage, right, someone has to wait for a part to get finished. So if someone can't start working on something until two other people have done something, then that person has to wait while those two work. That's not optimal, okay? That's where your marginal product starts to become not growing as much, hence the law of diminishing returns. All right? All right, so that's the product side of it. This is the production side. So you will be dealing with these sorts of graphs on a regular basis, okay? Or, sorry, tables. These aren't even graphs. All right, now, that's production. Now, with production, we eventually get to our ultimate goal, which are costs. So when we are dealing with our business, the first thing that we need to do is describe the difference between short run and long run, because this is something that's constantly harped on in the business world, right? It's not an overly big deal, but I just want to point it out because it's definitely something that we read and everybody kind of looks at it and goes, huh? What the? And, all right, so the short run is the time frame where there are fixed costs. And I'll talk about what fixed costs are here in a second. And then the long run is the time frame where everything is variable. So that definition sort of precludes us right into the separation of costs. there are two types of costs that you deal with, fixed costs and variable costs. It's a very standard practice when you're in business to divvy up your costs into fixed costs and variable costs. And fixed costs these are the things you're going to pay for even if you don't do anything. Right, so imagine, if you will, that you decide you're going to create a factory that creates these dry erase markers. Right? So you buy some land, you buy a factory, you build a factory that's got all the machinery in it that can build these pens, and then you decide not to bother to make any pens. Why? Who cares why? The obvious answer is probably because you ran out of money. But it could be something else, right? It could be that you got arrested and are now in jail, or, you got drafted and you're in Afghanistan, or you ran out of money, right? However you want to look at it. So, what sorts of things are fixed costs? What do you have to pay for, even if you don't turn the factory on? There's definitely some utilities in there, right? Well, once I've paid for those things, I don't have to pay for them anymore, though, right? Land. So depending on how you bought your land, either you have to pay the rent if you're renting the land, right? So even though you don't turn the factory on, if you've rented the land, sorry folks, you still have to pay. Or if you bought the land, then you have to pay off the mortgage, right? And if you have land, what does the government do in April? Right, taxes are always a part of it. Oh yeah, always got to have insurance, right? Even if you're not doing anything, you still have to have insurance, right? Because somebody may walk onto your property, accidentally trip and land face first onto a piece of rock and break their nose. It's your fault. It is, folks, right? I mean, if you ever need some work done, run over to your neighbors and accidentally, unpurposely trip off their, a wall or any piece of scary equipment that they have laying around. It's insurance now for them, as long as you can prove you didn't do it on purpose. It's the on purpose part that's tough. Right? So climb up on the roof and say, "Oh, I was fixing your chimney," and then fall off. Just don't die in the process. That would be bad. What else? Can you think of anything else that you have to pay for, even though you didn't make anything? Yeah, I mean, if we've already bought the materials, then we're not paying for them more, right? So once we've bought them, they're ours for good, right?
No, like, say instead of shipping the materials, we use them to self-pay for shipping.
How about warehousing? So if we're not using them, we have to store them somewhere, right? Well, if we're not going to store them in the shop because, of course, we don't want them there, we have to have a warehouse, so we must be warehousing them somewhere. That's not a bad thing. All right, that's pretty good. It's not too bad. Now, variable costs, on the other hand, costs that come from production and that grow with production, right? The idea here is that there's some sort of a relationship between the amount of money you have to pay versus the amount of production you do, and that they are growing at some equal algebraic rate. Classic example, right? Labor. And yes, of course, folks, this is the most expensive one that there is, labor. It's always a problem. And why is the labor most expensive? You want money, but what else do you want with money? You want security. What do you have to have security? You have to have insurance. Please note that there are two types of insurance that you pay for. There's the insurance for your employees and the liability insurance for your property and your things. Utilities are also a part of this, folks, right? If you think about it, you have to pay the electric bill to have service for the electricity. But once you start making stuff, the electricity bill is going to go up, right? Because you got to have it on for X number of hours. So raw materials. You're going to have to buy more raw materials. So that's just, what was the other one?
I don't remember.
Oh.
I'm trying to remember.
What else you got to pay for when there's workers there? Hint, it's up here too. Taxes, yeah. Folks, there are such a thing as payroll taxes. Yes, you have to pay them if you own a business. Do not be surprised by them. They're a real pain in the... They are fun to deal with. Is that it? That's very true. Uh-huh. True, but that's going to be fixed, right? So at least the rent isn't going to change based on the amount that you produce. That's why it's not. That's why it can't be that fixed and variable in that sense, right? The warehousing can be based on this because as you produce stuff, if you're not selling it, you gotta store it somewhere up and then put that box in the warehouse until someone says, okay, yeah, we'll buy it from you now. All right, that's not too terribly bad, though. So you're running this company, right? Where does your salary go? Is it fixed or variable? Do you get paid based on how much your workers work or based on no matter what? Depends on what you're doing. Absolutely right, right? So owner's salary can go both ways. Why would you want an owner's salary or even utilities or taxes to go on both sides of the coin? Why would that matter? True, but I mean, come on. In this day and age, folks, you pay yourself first. You don't pay your workers first. All you care about is your own money. Come on. Remember, we're not altruistic. We're assholes this first half of the semester. All we care about is getting our money. If my yearly salary is $500,000, the first $500,000 my company earns go in my frickin' pocket. Anything we make after that, okay, fine, I'll pay my workers. But I get paid first. Then we pay all the workers, and if there's more money that comes afterwards, then that also goes to me, because that's the way business works, right? I mean, remember, you guys are jerks. You don't care about your workers. All you care about is profit. Quit thinking like a nice person. All right, so the reasons why you want fixed costs and variable costs to be a little bit floaty is based on business settings, right? When you are running a business, in theory, you may want to be trying to sell your business, right? Maybe you want to get out of the business. Maybe you don't think it's as good as it was before. Maybe you have a job that could pay you $500,000 per year somewhere else, and you'd rather go do that instead of running your own business. So what you want to do is to make your business look better. A business that is better has low variable costs, because that means that on each item they produce, their profit per item is higher. When you like your business, you like the way it's running, and you don't want it to look as profitable because you don't want someone to buy you out, you want to say, oh, no, my variable costs are very high. Therefore, the profit per item that I produce is not as big as it is. You don't want to buy me. You really want to find some other company that's more profitable. I'm going to take anything that I might be able to switch down here and switch it so that it looks better. Businesses do this all the time, okay? It's part of the game. When you get into your own business classes, you will learn when and where this is legal and how it's probable that you want to do these things. We don't have to worry about it too terribly much in this class, but just realize that it seems like these two things are set in stone and that really they shouldn't be able to go back and forth. They do, okay? And it really is based on how you want your company to look, right? And how much tax liability you may have, right? So you may decide that on one year your salary is going to be $500,000 and the next year it's only going to be $100,000 because it's better for the tax implications both for you and your company. These are games that business owners play a lot, and they're maximizing profit all the time. Whenever a business owner cries about their taxes being too high, I look at them and say, If your taxes are too high, that means you're making lots of profit. High, right? So anyways, realize the difference between the two. One of them you always have to pay. One of them you pay when you start producing, and they adjust accordingly. All right. Now, fixed costs. Variable costs. Be used to the abbreviations. It's just get used to it. And then total cost is TC. Guess what equation I'm going to write up here? Total costs equal your fixed cost plus your variable costs. Woohoo! Really deep math. Now, let's see. I would draw a model of this type of graph, but I don't want to because I would definitely screw it up. So what I would like you to do is to switch to page 120 in your text if you have it somewhere near you. And the idea behind this kind of looks something like this. Doesn't quite flatten out that much, but all right, so this is basically how it looks. What this is pointing out to you is that exactly what we saw in my example over there. In the beginning, as you start working, so imagine if you built a factory that requires, say, 20 or 30 workers to man the factory and to run the entire line, right? The idea is that in order to have 20 workers, again, however much output you get from 20 workers, you would be minimizing your costs per worker if you were at this 20 workers. And that would be at your lowest point before your total cost starts shooting up. The idea is that if you have less than 20, somebody has to be doing 2 jobs, right? So maybe you've got somebody in an assembly line that's meant to have 20 people, but you only hire 18, and there's 2 people that have to do like maybe the first 1 to 5 parts, and then run to the end of the assembly line and do the last part. And then when they're done doing the last part, what do they have to do? Run back to do the first part, and then run back to the end part and do the end part, right? It's doable, right? And it's a way of minimizing your cost, right? Because then you don't have to hire another person, and we all know that people are the bane of all life in a business because they cost money. We hate them. So you might set up it's just weird, right? But would be more effective would be to hire those last 2 people so that everybody stays in their one spot and, attaches the right piece, right? And as the next thing comes down the assembly line, they attach, right? Tried and true method. This was done from the 40s until about the 90s. It's only recently that we've started to stop doing that. And why have we stopped doing that now, folks? 1, because we cost too much, and 2, because we've invented too many really cool machines that can do it for us. So instead of passing it down to us, right, it goes through a machine. And then what do? We look at it and go, did it work? So we close the door, and we open the door, and we close the door, and we open the door, and we close the door, and we say, yep, it worked. And we move it on to the next robot, right? That's the line nowadays in the car factories, folks. Okay, anyways, this graph, it's a nice one to look at, but it's a real pain in the ass to deal with, okay? It's not what businesses use when it comes to doing profit analysis. It's doable. You can use it. It's just a real pain in the butt. Only a mathematician would use it. Which means I like it, but you guys don't have to. What we will use when it comes to dealing with modeling and having a set of lines that make sense, is we will deal with averages instead. Now, why do averages make life easier? Why do we use averages? If I made 1 million items and my total cost was, $4 million, you would tell me that it cost us $4 to produce each unit, right? Because 1 million times 4 gets you to the 4 million. Does that mean that it cost literally $4 to make every item? No. But on average, it did. And so we have looking at the whole picture and breaking it down to 1 unit. All right? So we average. So the total analysis can be simplified to 1 item. So if the average cost per each item is $4 and the price that you sell it at is $5, now you guys know that for each item you make, you produce roughly $1 worth of profit. Well, revenue, right? Maybe we haven't taken away all the costs yet. But that's why we simplify it down into averages, because it just makes life easier. Now, average has an E in it. Average total cost. Guess how I'm going to write it? ATC, good. The way you figure out average total cost, you take your total cost and you divide by however many items you made. You guys know what an average is. It is exactly what it always has been. Don't sweat that one, okay? So if I can have average total cost, guess what else I can have average of? Fixed cost and variable cost. And guess how I write those? AFC and AVC. And they are defined in exactly the same way. These are averages, folks. Compute them, right? It's add up all the numbers, divide by the total number of numbers. It's the same stuff you've been doing for a bazillion years now. Or 5 or 10 or however old you are. 15 for some of us, maybe. All right, and the cool part about it is that averages don't screw up the math, right? The nice part about it is that total cost is fixed cost plus variable cost, and average total cost is also average fixed cost plus average variable cost, right? It works. The math is okay, right? Whether you're doing totals or averages. And the graph, and I have to use the word graph because model doesn't really do it for this one. This graph I want you guys to get comfortable with, right? If you go back to page 120 and look at the graph right next to the total curve, and technically I suppose there's another one over here. First off, please ignore average fixed cost. That's sort of an annoying variable. I won't ever use this one. Okay, it's there. You should kind of know what it looks like, but I will never ask you about it. But if I don't draw it, everybody will be like, well, what about that other line? You didn't draw the other line in the picture. And so I draw it, okay, and then I erase it and say, don't worry about it, okay? All right, the key to dealing with these graphs are the average total cost, the average variable cost, and the marginal cost. And technically, if I were being really nitpicky about this graph, cost goes through average total cost and average variable cost is this minimum point. And remember when I was telling you that you built a factory that's meant to have 20 workers? The idea is that your average costs will be minimized at that point. That's the idea behind it, okay? And this is exactly why you deal with averages, because on the average cost curve, you can see where the minimum is. It's real easy. You look at the smiley face and say, where's the bottom of the smiley face? That is the minimum cost point, okay? And this is the sort of thing that businesses look at when they have to deal with competition, is finding this minimum point. Please realize this is another one of those things where sometimes the obvious gets lost because we're trying to be assholes, and sometimes it's hard to do it. We are minimizing the average cost, not the total cost, okay? The way you minimize total cost, folks, produce nothing, okay? That is always how you minimize your total cost, is you say, close the freaking business, right? The idea, though, is that this average variable cost is often what we're looking for, because normally our price will be somewhere up above here, and we will be earning profit per item, and that will be the most profitable point to be at, usually. Okay, we'll talk about examples where that does and does not work in a little bit. But this graph I would like you to get a little bit comfortable with, just because it's something we're going to be using in chapters 7, 8, and 9 almost ad nauseum. Okay? All right, so it's a good spot to stop. We didn't really make it through all of chapter 6 because we really haven't talked about long-run average costs and economies of scale, but we can do that on Wednesday. So the quiz on Wednesday will cover chapter 5 and this first part of chapter 6, okay? So don't be surprised if you see some sort of a talk about elasticity product, price and quantity table, and a labor and output table that asks about the law of diminishing returns, okay?